never forget that almost instantly after WrestleMania 18, two massive events happened in the world of the then WWF. Stone Cold Steve Austin walked out because he wasn't happy with creative, but also we got the first ever brand split in 2002, which basically means Raw and SmackDown have been their own entities for almost 20 years. And sure, there were some breaks in between, but the argument is still going on about whether this was best for business, even though the blue brand was only part of the entire structure for basically about 3 years. So we all need to move on, but we never will. And when it comes to WrestleMania 18, there's only one match anyway that anybody wants to talk about, which is The Rock versus Hulk Hogan, icon versus icon. And really, if you want to kind of spin it, the proper return for the Hulkster to the World Wrestling Federation. I mean, he had been getting good reactions ever since he returned with the NWO in February, but on this night, the Toronto crowd decided we are going to step into a time machine and we are going to transport ourselves back to WrestleMania 6 and we're going to scream until we can't scream no more. As a result of all of this too, a lot of people say that this is the best match ever, just due to its reaction alone. Now, we can have that debate forever, meaning that we shouldn't, but forget about all that. Forget about what's the best and forget about what's the worst. Just know that you can still go and view this today and get goosebumps on your arm because the atmosphere just screams out of your television and it smacks you right in the face. The conversation didn't start this way, of course, because it was meant to be Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Hulk Hogan until the Rattlesnake decided, I don't want none of that. And it kind of came down to two factors and you basically pick one. Number one is that Austin was right. He didn't think their styles would mesh well together, so on the other side, people would look at it as a disappointment. Or two, he was still annoyed about Hulk Hogan coming into WCW and basically ruining his push and stealing whatever spotlight he was going to have, and also kind of felt like, knowing Hulk Hogan, he would try and make it all about him. And given what did go down, he did have a point. And does it matter? No, not really, because pun very well intended, what we got instead absolutely rocked. And while the reaction was a surprise to some, it shouldn't have been if you'd been following fan access that happened in the days leading up to WrestleMania. Apparently, any time anybody saw Hulk Hogan, they lost their flipping minds, so you kind of had a sniff of what was coming. And sure, nobody thought The Rock was going to get booed as much as he did, but I guess that just comes down to wrestling maths. If 100% of people are screaming for the other dude, someone's got to get jeered. And WWF at the time spent more money advertising this one matchup than they had done ever, because they were desperate to try and get some of the nostalgia fans to come back and taste their product. Mostly because they were terrified as the Attitude Era was slowly going away. Just to double down on this too, the day before WrestleMania, Vince McMahon put Hogan on a jet to go home, get his red and yellow gear and a bunch of pictures, because everybody had decided, hey, we want to bring back Hulkamania. So this whole last minute stuff has been happening for 2 decades and probably longer. Why couldn't you have just made this decision, I don't know, 5 days before? All of this came together perfectly though. There was almost 70,000 people in the Sky Dome. They made around about $4 million at the gate, and they sold around about $700,000 in merchandise. That was the third largest number in WWF history at the time, even though they were about to hit some rocky waters. I don't know how I keep doing it. Forget all that though, because who cares? Let's take the finger of power and go through WrestleMania 18 and give the good bits an up and the bad bits a down. Right, here is the truth about WrestleMania 18. It is a fun show to watch, but try and come up with more than, I don't know, 3 other matches that are on the card, and you can't, because like I've already said, people only cared about The Rock versus Hogan. Because this just ate everything up, including the brand split, because never forget, we never had a probative narrative for that. Basically, somebody walked on TV and went, well, we came up with a good idea and we've decided to do it. Do you remember how much you loved The Rock versus Hogan? Just worry about that. And oh yeah, Raw and SmackDown now different shows. Saliva are also the first thing we see on the broadcast, and that is the most 2002 WWF thing ever. They flippin' love saliva to the point I don't think I ever saw them outside of a World Wrestling Federation event. If you had told me Vince McMahon had made them up, I'd believe you. Thankfully, it starts really nicely because we have Rob Van Dam taking on William Regal for the Intercontinental title, and they just understand what they've got to do. Keep it short, keep it quick, keep it exciting, get the fans all pumped up. It's kind of funny too, because it was around this time RVD had been told, look Rob, you need to calm your offense down because you keep hurting people, and it's so obvious here because he's being so careful, and then in around about 2 minutes, he's still busting open William Regal's lip. As always here on Retro Ups and Downs 2, William Regal is just a treat. Like the first thing he does is take his hand and he's fiddling around his pants trying to find those brass knucks, and when Van Dam kicks them out of his hand and they fall to the floor, his facial expressions, well, they are just a treat. He also smashes RVD with this half Nelson German suplex thingy that looks like it kills Rob Van Dam. And then silly Regal, he had to go after the brass knucks again. The rest sees all this though and he goes to sort it out, and because Regal's a wrestler, he gets distracted, he gets booted in the face, he then gets smashed with the 5-star frog splash, he loses his title, but again, it's only about 6 minutes, and it really is very entertaining. This cannot be said of match 2 though, even though it clocks in around about the same time, because DDP, the European champion, was defending that title against Christian, and it's just the way both guys were being used. And I have made my feelings very clear on other episodes of Ups and Downs about how great I think Christian is, but I also think DDP kicked ass, apart from when he came into the WWF, because we didn't get him nothing. Firstly, he was a stalker when he chased the Undertaker's wife around, and here he was like the smiley, positive, happy dude, which was kind of funny, but it also kind of sucked. And the best version of Diamond Dallas Page was the one we'd seen in WCW, but because that had been invented in WCW, he was never allowed to do it in the WWF. Down. There is a fantastic promo beforehand by Christian who's doing that smirking thing that DDP had taught him. Because if you've forgotten the story and you just tuned into this, you would have thought Christian's having some kind of a breakdown. And of course it was all about using DDP to get back to his winning ways, hence why they'd signed this match. But really the only reason we did do it is so DDP could hit Christian with a diamond cutter and then get on the microphone and say, oh, hey, Christian, my buddy, it's great. You didn't throw a tantrum, because at the time Christian was throwing a load of tantrums. And of course, as soon as DDP said the word tantrum, Christian threw a flipping tantrum. I think the main problem is that nobody in the building really cares, which WWF went out of their way to make sure was the case, because they said Christian was now from Florida instead of Canada. And honestly, if you would just put this match on any episode of Monday Night Raw, I don't think anybody would have said that. We then get our first glimpse into what is coming later, because The Rock is here to cut a promo, and this may as well be Rocky Maivia from 1998, because while you can hear a few cheers of Rocky, Rocky, you can also hear thousands of people going boo. Much like me, he calls Hulk Hogan Hulk Hogan, because that's just so much easier to say when you're in your flow, and makes it very clear that whoever wins later is going to be crowned the best ever. I bet Stone Cold Steve Austin loved hearing that. The People's Champ then goes after Coach because he finds out that he's not taking his vitamins or saying his prayers, and actually gets the Coach to get down on his knees and say a prayer. And I think we all just have to give kudos to Coach in these segments. He always did very well. Rock kicks him out of the shot before telling Hogan to bring Hulkamania because he wants to kick him in his Hulkastrudel. So never forget, as many times as The Rock hit, he also missed. Talking about hitting and missing, it was then time for everything with the Hardcore Championship. Now, as we do know even today, the 24/7 rule is great, but back in 2002, it had been around for almost 2 years, ever since Crash Holly had introduced the thing, and WWE or WWF, whatever, had basically run out of ideas. I mean, there just wasn't much more you could do with it. So the initial match is Maven versus Goldust, and it always blows my brain that Maven won Tough Enough, got to appear on stages like this, then was out the door by 2005. And when they both knock each other out with trash cans, Spike Dudley just runs down, he steals the pin, and for a little while, he is the Hardcore Champion. This actually does extend throughout the whole show though. I mean, you get a match, then we go back to the Hardcore title, then you get a match, and we go back to the Hardcore title, and you get such infamous segments as Molly Holly knocking out the Hurricane with a frying pan because she's so desperate to become the champ. And she just does it so nicely too, like, well, I really didn't want to do it, but I also want the gold. She then gets knocked out courtesy of a door thanks to Christian, and he's such a flippin' heel, he doesn't care. And even though he's this close to driving away as the champ, Maven then uses the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment, the surprise roll-up. He then is the Hardcore Champion again, and he just leaves in a taxi. So in many ways it sucks, but hey, it was fun. We also get a performance by Drowning Pool, and just take everything I said about Saliva and apply it here. I swear, the WWF's favourite song ever is Bodies. Remember, let the bodies hit the floor. They used it for flubbing everything. Following on from this too, you get Kane versus Kurt Angle, which is a very, very interesting match. Because it's not bad by any means, and having Kurt Angle get on the microphone beforehand and just rip into Canada for their figure skating gold medal, which was won under dubious circumstances, is excellent. But by the time the big red machine gets in there, these two decide to have a wrestling match. I'm like, I don't want to see Kurt Angle try and wrestle 7-foot Kane. I want to see them have a war. And that's just why it doesn't work. At 10 minutes is just a little bit too long too, but also the finish is just so WWE. because clearly they don't want Kurt Angle to lose, and clearly they don't want Kane to lose. So Kane is allowed to kick out of the Angle Slam. He also gets out of the ankle lock before, in this really messy bit, Angle kind of uses the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment, but also puts his feet on the rope and pins Kane, even though he doesn't really pin Kane. So it just ends with such a whimper, and you never get your WrestleMania all right moment, and you kind of question why it was on the card to begin with. Down. Next, however, is The Undertaker versus Ric Flair, and I don't know why, but I still love it. Up. Maybe it was just because it was something I never expected to see in 2002, all the facts that came out when we were done. Like, for example, that Ric Flair going into this had lost all his confidence, even though all of his peers and many fans considered him the greatest pro wrestler ever. And that just goes to show too, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past, it doesn't matter how other people see you, if your brain isn't in the right frame of mind, you're always gonna feel sad. And there's nothing wrong with that, but make sure you go talk to someone. The Undertaker was a psycho during the build to this too, as he beat up Ric Flair's family and beat up Arn Anderson, and you also get such gibberish when it comes to the narrative. Because Ric Flair was the co-owner of the WWF at the time, but because he was insistent on having this Undertaker match at WrestleMania, all the power then went back to Vince McMahon, even though throughout the entire Attitude Era, Vince McMahon was having fights with everybody and nobody kicked him out of power. Go figure. Still, this is no DQ and it's just great. I mean, Ric Flair is basically bleeding even before the bell has rung. And within the first 30 seconds, The Undertaker and Ric Flair are just fighting over the announce table. Taker is soon bleeding too, and then a pipe from his motorbike is being used too. And there is a lot of daft stuff in this, don't get me wrong. Like, Ric Flair was always going to lose because WrestleMania and it's The Undertaker. And yet still, there is multiple occasions where the dead man has it won, but picks Ric Flair's shoulders off the mat at 2 as if to go, oh, I could have won. And I thought that's what we did when that guy was losing, but as it soon transpires, this is essentially just a big old beating on poor nature boy Ric Flair. The best part is still when Arn Anderson finally gets his revenge and he pops up from nowhere in the ring and gives Undertaker a brilliant spine buster. And honestly, that could have been the finish, especially because it's not really another 3 years when Randy Orton was taking on The Undertaker, when all of a sudden WWF was like, oh my gosh, he has a streak. So you actually could have done it here and nobody would have been that bothered. But of course we didn't. But yes, after a while you do realise that it's just Booger Red, the worst nickname in all of wrestling ever history period, just beating up Ric Flair. But that's also kind of why it works. Who sells better than Nate? It ends with Taker just ignoring 4 chair shots and giving Ric Flair the tombstone and getting the 1, 2, 3. And I will always get a kick out of this, and I don't really know why. Do you know what comes next as well? Edge versus Booker T, as I'm sure you recall, are fighting over the fact that one of them wants to be in a Japanese shampoo commercial. I still have so many questions all these years later. The main one is that what the hell was wrong with this company? So they wrote into the contract, we will take Edge or Booker T, but they have to have a match, and whoever comes out victorious can then sign the deal. I mean, that is not somebody you want to work for. Booker T does cut this brilliant promo beforehand where he's wearing glasses to let everyone know that he is an intelligent guy. And once again, this just falls foul from a crowd that doesn't give 2 shits. I think everyone was just sitting waiting going, is it time for Hulk Hogan? No, it's not. Well, we're not going to do nothing. Even though hometown boy Edge is there, they couldn't care less. They also screw up a Frankensteiner early on, which scared the crap out of me because I thought Booker T was going to kill himself. And there is a nice moment when Edge goes to do a spinneroonie. Obviously, it's a part of crap, but the crowd loves that. And then he hits the execution. And yeah, it's just 1, 2, 3. It goes about 6 minutes. Edge now needs to be in the shampoo commercial. And yet somehow it's on a WrestleMania. Truly baffling. Down. And then this continues too, because it is Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Scott Hall. And never forget that Stone Cold was the most important cog in the wheel, the most important cog in the machine, and here he's just rolling out in a nothing match. Even more nuts than this though, is that at one point, Scott Hall was actually booked to win. Kevin Nash was going to get involved and X-Pac was going to get involved and reveal that he is the brand new member of the NWO. But when Scott Hall's personal problems reared their head again, Austin was like, man, we need to finish this program now. So thankfully he won. There is just nothing to write home about though, there's nothing special to it, even though again it is Stone Cold Steve Austin, but also it's the first time we'd seen the NWO at WrestleMania. There should have been something here. There is not. It's mostly just Kevin Nash interfering too. He can't go 5 seconds without doing something. And even though Austin is busting out stunners on everyone, 78% of them are just mistimed. And there is a good tease when Hall hits his own stunner on Stone Cold Steve Austin, but Austin just pops up, hits 2 stunners onto Scott Hall, the first one of which is mistimed. And that's the end of it. And do you remember how well Scott Hall sold that final stunner too? Again, the only reason he did do that is I think he realized, man, I've flubbed up like 42 other ones. I better get this one right. I will never get over that this is the penultimate WrestleMania for the Rattlesnake. It is just there, and it's just doing nothing, and it's getting it down. You then get one of those WWE Access highlight package videos after this, and all you need to know is that at one point, Triple H comes out on a stage, he does his entrance where he spits water everywhere, and he just covers the entire crowd, and they don't care. They are happy to be in the game spit. I tell you what's far better than being drowned in somebody else's mouth juice though, the fatal four-way tag team title match that comes afterwards. Once again, the fans couldn't give two hoots, but I cared, and I'm giving it up. But you get Billy and Chuck defending their titles against the APA, the Dudley Boys, and the Hardy Boys. And once again, Saliva are here to play the Dudley Boys to the ring. And it's actually Bradshaw who gets taken out first when he gets hit by the 3D. But beforehand, he smashes Billy Gunn with a clothesline from hell that is so hard, I don't care what you say, there was nothing fake about that. From there though, WWE just can't help themselves. Because Stacy Keibler was the manager of the Dudley Boys at the time, and she gets on the ring apron and she distracts Jeff Hardy by wiggling her ass. And do you know how Jeff Hardy responds to this? He slaps her bum and then kisses her before pushing her to the mat below. And before this, he was so excited he whipped his top off and started jiggling around. This was just utterly surreal, and to be frank, very bad. Him and Matt Hardy then finally remember they're in a wrestling match, and they hit Bubba Ray Dudley with both the Swanton Bomb and the Twist of Fate to get the 1, 2, 3. But then Jeff Hardy just gets smashed in the face with the tag team titles. Billy and Chuck pin him. They remain your champs. There's a pretty crappy ending, but honestly, everybody in this works so damn hard, but they barking up the wrong tree. They ain't gonna get a peep out of anyone. So they're basically there to do a job, which is to set up The Rock versus Hulk Hogan, which comes next. And the whole thing is just crazy. Now, I will admit that I enjoy it less these days, given the comments that Hulk Hogan made a few years ago. That's just my position on it. But you'd be hard-pressed to say that this isn't great. They don't even need to do anything before this gets magic. And in fact, early on, they're just standing there, but they are getting such a good reaction from the crowd. You, the idiot watching from home, get all excited and all ready. And that's why it's got to get it up. What I think we all forget, or maybe even ignore, is that Hulk Hogan doesn't jump for any of The Rock's moves. He basically just kind of falls on his ass the entire time. But again, none of this matters because that's not what you watch it for. I mean, seriously, at some stages, one of them will just punch the other, the crowd will roar like they just won the lottery, then you're roaring as well because the electricity is coming to you and making you feel that way. And I honestly would take this in every single wrestling match until the day that I die. Just getting that power running through my veins, it reminds me why I love this stupid stuff so much. The amount of boos that Rock gets for his sharpshooter is genuinely hilarious because nobody wanted to see that. And even though it's Hulk Hogan who introduces the weight belt and starts whipping The Rock, it's The Rock who receives all the heat when he retaliates. Nobody wants to see him do anything. Hulk Hogan hulking up too has got to be considered one of the greatest moments in WrestleMania history too. It's met by so much noise. And I'm always flabbergasted that he didn't win. With all the stories and who knows what else, you're just convinced The Rock is going to lose, but no. Not only does he kick out of the leg drop, but then he hits the rock bottom, he hits the people's elbow, and he pins Hulk for the 1, 2, 3, meaning an elbow drop is what finished this. But let's face it, Hogan knew exactly what he was doing because as soon as this was over, he was the most important person in wrestling again. We then smashed the fast forward button really quickly to let you know, oh, Hulk Hogan is a face now because Kevin Nash and Scott Hall run down to beat him up, but The Rock makes the save before he puts Hogan in the ring and says, Hogan pose, Hogan pose. And he poses and he covers his ears as 70,000 people just cheer him as if he is the hero of the world. I mean, I honestly don't know where all of this noise keeps coming from, but I do know from moment one until they have left the building, you will have the hairs on the back of your arms and the back of your necks go up. It is just a well put together masterpiece. I mean, go and show this to people that don't like wrestling. If when they've watched it, they're still not hooked on wrestling, the truth of the matter is, they ain't ever gonna be hooked. I then have never felt more sorry for 3 people in my entire life because Jazz is out to try and retain her title against Trish Stratus as Alita, and this crowd didn't really care about anything before The Rock versus Hogan, so now, well, they'd rather be doing anything else. You also don't get much from it because we all know how WWE used to treat the women's title, although Jazz is very good here, so we have to give her a pat on the back, and she just hits a fisherman suplex on the top rope on Lita after around about 5 minutes, and that's that. down. Which brings us to the biggest mistake on the show. And look, it's nobody's fault. This is all about hindsight being 2020. But if anybody had known just how nuts The Rock versus Hulk Hogan was gonna be, ain't no way when we were drawing up a card we would have gone and we end with Triple H and Chris Jericho for the Undisputed title. It's also too long, all things considered, and I never noticed this before, but I had read reports. If you do keep an eye on the crowd, loads of them actually do leave. The other real problem is that this wasn't actually Triple H versus Chris Jericho, even though Chris Jericho was the champion. It was Triple H versus his ex-wife Stephanie McMahon. Jericho's first title run was always so weird because of this, because he was essentially a lackey for somebody else, even though he was going to be the guy in the ring doing all of the work. And while it's far easier for me to stand here in 2021 and say, well, they should have done this, they should have done that, they should have just made this really short, they should have made this really wacky, and they should have made this as over the top as possible, and maybe that would have salvaged a little bit, but otherwise you watch it and it just doesn't feel like a main event. Steph gets pedigreed before the end, and of course that leads to a tease that maybe Y2J is going to retain his titles, but come on now. Triple H had returned from his massive quad injury in January 2002, and the whole reason for that was to culminate here and become the champion, and after he has pedigreed Y2J, that's exactly what he does. It would have been absolutely fine as well if it hadn't have gone on last, but you can't undo the past, and that's why we have to give it a down. And before I do leave you overall, I will give you Dave Meltzer's star ratings. Everyone loves them. RVD versus Regal got 2 stars. DDP versus Christian got 1 3/4 stars. All the hardcore title stuff got -0.5 a star. Oh boy. Angle versus Kane got 2 1/4 stars. Taker versus Flair got 3 stars. Edge versus Booker got 1 1/4 stars. Austin versus Hall got 1 star. The tag team match got 2 1/4 stars. Rock versus Hogan, a measly 3 stars. The women's match got -1 star. And Triple H versus Jericho got 3 stars. So according to Dave Meltzer, it was as good as The Rock versus Hogan. Ruh-roh. But it is fine. It's fun enough to watch. It's just massively propped up by and hurt because of one match. Now, please do get in the comments below and keep suggesting what you would like to see on Retro Ups and Downs in the future. Next week, we are going to do Triple H crashing the wedding because I think it will be fun, but I will keep an eye on these suggestions going forward. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Head over to whatculture.com where you can read yourself some articles, follow What Culture on social media, and click a video around my head and keep on the channel. My name is Simon for What Culture. Thank you very much for joining me as always. I'll see you on the next one.